we will go to a short presentation by Megan Kavanaugh. Megan is chair of the Australian Catholic Council for Employment Relations, which is an agency of the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference. One of the principal functions of ACCER is to make submissions to the annual wage reviews in support of low-paid workers. In short, to promote the wages and social outcomes articulated in Rerum Novarum. Megan is solicitor and a partner in a national law firm. Her main areas of expertise include equal opportunity, discrimination, unfair dismissal, harassment and diversity, work health and safety, and industrial relations. We hope that Megan's presentation will provide some ideas on how we can advocate for decent wages and modern social safety nets in contemporary Australia. After Megan's presentation of about 10 minutes, we will return to questions on both aspects of the webinar. I'll now pass back to you, Stefan.
Thanks very much, Brian. So Megan, are you ready to share with us?
Absolutely. And look, thanks very much for the opportunity, Brian. My name is Megan Kavanaugh. I am an employment and regulatory lawyer by training. 5 years ago, I was tapped on the shoulder by George Kerrick, who some of you might know if you're from Queensland, to join ACER. And I sort of did so with some trepidation, understanding how important this work is. And as a Catholic, how important it is for me to show my living contribution to that work. Within a couple of years, with the intention of resigning as the workload is quite significant, I somehow managed to become the chair of that committee. And for the last couple of years have been responsible for pulling together the national wage case submission made by the Australian Catholic Bishops' Council. Now, I should, before I take any credit for that work, anything that we do currently is because we stood and are standing on the shoulders of Brian Lawrence and all of his wonderful work over sort of a 10-year period in compiling that submission, which is an enormous job. So I offer my very warm congratulations and thanks to Brian for all he does and continues to do in this very important area of law and I think of church work. I wanted to give, and look, please bear with me. I've got, I think I'm nearly over time. I've just started, but I'll quickly share with you a couple of slides, which I find that when there's a lot of talking going on, it can be easy to read some things too. So bear with me for one moment. You'll see there that I'm talking about the application of Rerum Novarum in modern Australian society. I'm very happy to share this PowerPoint with people because it provides, I think, a useful summary about what Rerum Novarum is perhaps in the modern day world and the key principles, which have already been touched upon, but I think it's useful to note. It's about the dignity of every person. And I think that's really important. While there is a focus about wages and work, there was a question asked before about, well, what does that mean in the modern world? And I think that's so fascinating because when Rerum Novarum was written, yes, we were at it was probably coming at a time when the Industrial Revolution had peaked. We were moving to a different form of revolution around perhaps technology and industry from perhaps just the pure use of human capital. And so that's very interesting to me that it was focusing on the wage that a man supporting a 5-person family would need to support themselves. We no longer live in a world where people have a job. We live in a world where people cobble together work, much as they did in that Victorian era, to get by, particularly the working poor. When you talk about the gig economy, none of those people are actually employees. They are contractors. So they don't get a wage. They get a contract rate, which very often will be much less than that provided by the work that we're doing to try and secure better minimum wages. So I think we need to focus on that for one moment. Rerum Novarum is as important as it has always been, but we need to take the message of Rerum Novarum and apply it to a circumstance that is entirely changed from that of 130 years ago. We do not have workers. We have giggers. We also have people who cannot expect to keep a job into old age. We do not have a sense of job security. We have people not working for the one company, maybe for a career. We have people who are forced, as I said, to cobble jobs together. We do not have the same sense of family unit, perhaps universally or even majority-wise than we once did. We have varieties of families who work to support themselves in a variety of ways. And so for me, the challenge moving forward in supporting the bishops is to understand that need and to translate it. And I think we've got a really fabulous opportunity right here, right now, to make big impacts and strides if what we are really trying to do is defend these ideas and these key principles, if that's actually our intention as Catholics and as a community. Because that the case has an effect on, again, the dignity of workers, the need to ensure that they are supported and have a decent standard of living. And I think if we think about the idea of workers, not just as people currently in employment, but people working, that is a much more powerful definition than the limited scope of which the wage case currently focuses. If we think about people as workers, including those who have worked, so the vulnerable in terms of the aged care sector, or perhaps the disabled or single parents, if we think about those people as workers too, the living wage is not a sufficient nexus or descriptor of what we are trying to achieve. And what I think we are seeing is, since the marvellous work of the Harvesters case and Commissioner Higgins, as he then was, to actually dig down and find out about what working men and their families need, we now need another approach, which talks about what is a worker in Australia today and what are their needs. That's a significant challenge. But one, interestingly, that the federal government met last year on the flick of a switch. They implemented JobKeeper and JobSeeker within a fortnight, paying Australian workers, whether they be casual, part-time, permanent, who were in insecure employment or had lost their work because of COVID, $750 a week. So we know what a minimum wage looks like. And it's not the amount that you earn per hour, but it's the amount you need to live and support a family. And I think, as I said earlier, for us to make the most of the recent experience, to really change mindsets and thinking around what is just and fair and equitable, we need research. We need investment. We need running partners with economists and universities and accountants and lawyers to actually come together and unpick the thinking that we seem to be a bit stuck in as to what is a worker and what is dignity in work. That definition must expand if we are actually to change and revolutionise, making the most of the spirit of Rerum Novarum, which is actually embedded in our constitution, interestingly. One of the few places in the world that you can say that Rerum Novarum is embedded in our constitution in the conciliation and arbitration powers. We've got a duty to defend that constitution and to defend Rerum Novarum. And I think now is the time for us to start thinking about this in a revolutionary way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Megan. Wow, there's a lot of things there to pick up on. I see that Ray and Pamela have posted a question in the chat. I'll read it out anyway, just to save time. I have often wondered why the money I gain from renting my money enjoys a low taxation structure and therefore higher net income than money earning by the sweat of one's brow. Any thoughts on that? I don't know if you'd like to comment, or Bruce.
Look, I'll start there. I have to say very, very much the outset, as I did, I'm not a tax lawyer. I'm an employment regulatory lawyer, and I know how to stay in my lane. I'm not necessarily against the idea that you can invest your money to get a return, and neither is Rerum Novarum. Rerum Novarum doesn't talk about a Marxist idea of shared capital or shared ownership of things. There's a recognition in Rerum Novarum about people being able to get ahead or provide for themselves. But there's also this very clear recognition that there must be a safety net. There must be a protection for working people who do not have that benefit of alternative streams of income or safety nets, if you like. I mean, again, at the moment, you're probably not earning a lot on your money, depending on where it is, considering interest rates and things like that. But I don't think Rerum Novarum is anti people investing money and making returns. I think what Rerum Novarum is making sure that there have, again, revolutionary at the time, the idea that governments would ensure conciliation and arbitration between workforces and labour. That is there. But my point is more about saying if we're going to see real redistribution in the spirit of Rerum Novarum, that is about us now talking about what workers look like now as compared to 130 years ago.
If I could just jump in on that, I'm not actually saying that we shouldn't be able to get a return on the investment. I'm all in favor of that. My concern is that if my investment is in something that produces capital gains or dividends, I actually enjoy a more beneficial tax structure and therefore end up with more net income than if I go out and work for a living. So, and it's that structure of taxation that I recognize you're not a tax person, but I'm wondering if Rerum Novarum has anything to say to that as to how, you know, if I invest and I get capital gains, my capital gains get a lower taxation than if I earn that same money through wages, is what I'm getting at.
I accept all of that. Again, I think there is something in Rerum Novarum about that, about spreading the ownership more equitably and as much as possible, and acknowledging the duty of the state to regulate. Those things absolutely fit within it. And I do think that we are possibly now in Australia at a crossroads where we need to be looking at things holistically differently from the tax base. But I'd also, and I had this conversation with Brian yesterday, I think for me, I'm very keen for us to start looking at something that looks more like not just about a wage, but actually about a guaranteed minimum income. That's what we had from March to September last year, really from March to March this year, a national guaranteed minimum income. And so what that then says, we are going to have to revolutionise our tax base and how we think about tax, if that is our goal. And I kind of think that's where, if we really want to live this spirit of a revolutionary Rerum Novarum, that's where we need to be going. People have insecure, they don't work full time. One of the interesting statistics and something coming out of the budget in this last week was about the home owner incentive for single parents, trying to enable them to use the government to guarantee deposits for home ownership, where they've got to come up with 2% and the government will come up with a balance or guarantee the balance of that deposit. The numbers that they're talking about are excruciatingly low in terms of the number of people that will actually be able to get a grant through that scheme. But 71% of single parent families are women-run families. And of that 71%, it's about 60 to 80% of those women work part-time. So even if I'm able to achieve through the Bishop's submission an increase in the national minimum wage for those living on a national minimum wage, which is it affects about 25% of the workforce directly and about 70 to 80% of the workforce indirectly by increasing that national minimum wage. That means nothing if this woman can only work 20 hours a week because of her family responsibilities. That's why I think we need to be moving further towards this idea of a minimum income, not a minimum wage.
It's very interesting, Megan, that the Pope has also been talking about a universal minimum wage or for every country, not the same for every country, of course. But so I think that a lot of people are looking at this very seriously now.
So is this, if I can ask a question, is this along the idea of the Joe Biden idea where he's been advocating for a universal minimum wage for American workers of $15,000 a year?
It's a little bit along those lines, but I think if you're actually talking about a universal income, if you think about it, $15,000 a year in the United States is a very different example to ours. They don't have an idea of conciliation and arbitration. They don't have protections for workers in terms of striking and those sorts of things. You only have to look back to the comparison between shearers' strikes of the 1890s compared to what the Rockefellers and the Fricks and people like that were doing to their workers in America in the 1890s, to see that Australia and the United States are by no means comparable. $15,000 when Joe Biden's talking about it, it's a recognition that the rate of pay in the United States is just far too low. Their national minimum, they don't have a national minimum wage, and it can be in terms of on an hourly rate, and it can be as low as $8 and $9 an hour, and then in other states higher. But I think what he's saying is that if you are working full time, you should be getting at least that type of money. What I'm talking about is that you might not necessarily be working. That's why it's an income, not a wage, to provide a level of security and dignity.
So do we update the Hawke and Keating idea that back in the 80s that they had this idea of the minimum wage, but then that would be supported by a social safety net that would, they would agree what was the minimum for a family to survive, and if you didn't get it through wages, you get it through a social service wage.
It's kind of that. It's exactly that kind of an idea. Although I think it's somewhat unfair to credit Hawke and Keating with it first. It's been bubbling around for quite some time, though perhaps they gave it a little kick along when promising that no child would be living in poverty through that restructure of tax bases and all the rest of it. They didn't make it, but the dream's still alive. And I think picking up on the question that was actually asked, what can we do? Advocacy is a huge part of it, but the only way to demonstrate real and significant importance and how this isn't going to break the place, because I think that's what the detractors, AIG, ACCI, those types will always say it'll break the economy, is to demonstrate through real data and intensive research that isn't the case. And the fact that RMIT have introduced some fascinating research in Victoria about the impact of the JobKeeper job seeker payment to demonstrate that for the first time, Victorian families were not living in poverty. So we know what the number is. And we can do it on 2 weeks' notice.
Yeah, but the other concern there, of course, is the University of Melbourne has been running research for that far longer, which showed that an unemployed worker, there was a 30% on cost in medical costs and a 30% on cost in judicial costs because of the breakdown they suffered, which the government refused. Both sides, both parties have refused to factor into their judgments. So I'm wondering how we're going to get tax reform. They've ignored the ideas put forward by Ken Henry. And you've got something about 84 politicians have houses that they benefit from through negative gearing. We haven't done anything about these huge companies that make huge profits in Australia paying tax in Australia because they offshore the profits. So we're really stuck in a bind here. And then we've only just reorganised the union movement that is now looking at these sorts of issues in a proper way under their last several years of leadership. So when there's entrenched greed within the parliament itself, how are you ever going to get this sort of reform through?
Wayne, I'm not quite so pessimistic as that. I do think that numbers speak. And when you think that Treasury is the one who made the decision to put JobKeeper, JobSeeker in place, there are people of reason. And when you talk about reason, I'm talking about numbers and data who can understand this. So but I don't think that you can come at it with emotion, and I don't think you can come at it with failed history. I think you've got to come at it with current research, and we have the most perfect case study. If only we could provide the data to them to demonstrate how it works. And remembering that the church is the second largest private sector employer in Australia collectively. We forget the size and power that we represent. And if that could be harnessed in a way that actually provides a collective voice in combination with others who are singing from the same hymn sheet, there is much influence to be had.
If I can just jump in for a moment, I've posted a couple of links in the chat to Manitoba, Canada, where a basic annual income experiment went from, I think it was 1974 to 79. And unfortunately, at the time, when that was brought to an end, all the data was sealed for a while. And I really don't know the final results of the research.
Ray, the Manitoba research is really used as a very strong example. And I do understand that the data hasn't been fully released or considered, but it's been demonstrated to be a very strong example of the benefits of that national or a secured income, particularly when it came to things like family violence, which is such an epidemic, where it came to then enabling families to make choices about where they live and what they do, around criminal justice records and the crime recidivism rates and things like that. It's been shown to be an absolute masterpiece. There was another one also conducted, I have a feeling, somewhere around about like in a county in Oregon or somewhere like that at around about the same time, that shows very similar results. They've got other examples that they've run in Spain and other countries around the world. And I think whether you call it a national secure income or something similar, if you look in the Nordic countries, there's certainly a lot of data to recommend it. And I think even our experience in Australia last year, if we could get the funds to research it, the amount of funding that we get to run the national wage case on behalf of the bishops is very, very small. We, compared to all of the other people who are making those submissions, we don't have a lot of money to play with, and we certainly don't have any money to conduct that research. If we had compelling research that we could refer to in next year's submission to demonstrate that this $750 odd is enough to take a family out of poverty, and it's not based on an hourly rate, it's an amount that they must take home every week, I think we'd really be humming. But in terms of what the church's credibility, what could give us more credibility than doing a research project or an undertaking to demonstrate how we could bring people out of poverty without breaking the economy, to put in next year's annual wage submission, to talk then about tax reform, to talk about all of those sorts of things about how we ensure dignity and fairness and equity. I don't think anything could be more powerful, frankly, because it's actually then that's the living mission, and it cuts across so many of the silos that church works across. I just think there's so much good news if we were better, and maybe that feeds on Bruce's point about the fact that there's perhaps too many silos or not enough integration in that messaging. There are so many good news stories to share, and this could be really up there with them.
Right. Yeah. Milan?
My wife and I work in the as volunteers for St Vincent de Paul Society, and one of the things we absolutely noted, and I think it'd be worth talking to the society, is that the huge drop-off in calls. People weren't calling; they didn't need to call us, so you didn't have the emergency relief need that people have in normal times. That's number one. No, and I'm talking, that could be some data or information that's worth pulling in. The second thing is just talking about principle, that, you know, if you're looking at the economy is based on competition and blah, 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 and consumerism. If every person is a capable consumer, just argue on that point, there's your economy. Your economy stayed afloat relatively well because people had buying power. So, you know, in principle, if you give that kind of idea of universal income that you're talking about credence, you're actually saying, no, we all become a little bit more equal in being able to buy our daily bread, you know, and
agree.
You know, all that sort of stuff.
But what we need is the data. And I said, I'm a lawyer. I'm not the person that pulls those numbers together. We need, and again, I can also speak because I work across Catholic, Anglican, Presbyterian, Methodist, and other broader church organisations who provide services similar to St Vincent de Paul, they had the same issue. It was really interesting that the federal government actually gave funding to those organisations to pay for more people to be on call centres and to be there to take calls, and the calls fell off. They had to redistribute and return a lot of those funds because they just weren't used.
Good. Yeah.
There was no demand. Now that is the data we need to say we know what the number is and we know what the effect of it is. This could not be more simple, and we have a wonderful case study, timely and relevant.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Well, there's certainly a lot of kind of issues coming out that could make the material for many more sessions.
Stephanie, can I just answer Anne's question? She said, how much would the research project cost? That's a little bit like describing how long is the piece of string. I can tell you that within this network, there will be people who can help and donate time. What we'd be really looking for are people at universities who would be able to assist with a research project. We'd be looking for someone from big accounting, you know, whether it's the likes of, you know, the big four accounting houses. We already have fantastic barrister that gives us most of his time for nothing. He charges us for a daily rate when he puts in hours and hours of work and dedication behind the scenes to assist us with this. I volunteer my time. So in that sense, what we really need, though, are those people that can pull together this data and the research. And it's the sort of thing that, sorry, Milan, I think it was saying, what's the data from other Catholic organisations? What can they tell us? And at the same time, it's what's the Treasury data telling us, and pulling this together in the appropriate data sets to demonstrate the effect. Yep. So, I mean, if I was to hazard a guess, if we could first of all work out what volunteerism we could have to assist, I'm talking about people with, you know, PhD economists and actuarials and all of those sorts of people. If we understood who might be, what the network might deliver for us to tap into, and then I think we could put a scope around it in terms of how we fund the balance of what's needed.
In terms of where Catholic ministries are, I think in principles of Catholic social teaching, I do work with society, and I'm very pleased to see a number of Vinnie's faces around the screens in front of me as well. But I really do think we're not perfect in the space in any way. There are gaps, and of course there will be. But I really do think that, you know, we do espouse all of the teachings of Rerum Novarum and Catholic social teaching. Preferential optional of the poor happens to be probably key to what we do and how we do that. I think we're well known for what we do in that space, and walk beside all the other Catholic ministries in terms of this too. So look, I have to admit, I think I've worked in other Catholic ministries across health and other spaces, but I do actually quite proudly sort of say I think Vinnie's doing pretty well in that space, especially espousing the whole ministry of Jesus, of that radical inclusivity, that restoration and accompaniment that we do, walking with those that we serve.
Great, thanks, Leo.
It's also one of the most bankable brands, Deborah, picking up on your point before. It's a bankable brand. The brand is so valuable because it is trusted and because of the great work that St Vincent de Paul does.
Very true, Megan. And the other thing is too, it was also noted at the beatification of Frederick Osnam, the founder of St Vincent de Paul, that he was certainly, his voice was echoed all the way through Rerum Novarum. So, 50 years after his passing in France. So it's certainly very, very much at the heart of the work, a lot of work that we do. But like I said, even for us, there are gaps and we fall through them at times. And I think one thing that I would always say is that for us, it's eternally vigilant in terms of how we go about that.
Stephanie, can I come in?
Sure.
I'd like to ask Bruce about cultural change. Going back to Megan's need for research, etc. What was it 20, 30 years ago? We did the work on Commonwealth for the Common Good, probably one of the most substantial pieces of research and advocacy that the Catholic Church is engaged in. did we not pick, I mean, it was debated on the floor of Parliament. Bruce, have we got the same culture that can commit to that sort of research that Megan's asking for, or do we need some sort of a shake-up in our faith community to get this going again?
Thank you, Tony. Well, we certainly do. In some ways, we've had a big shake-up, haven't we, with the various things that have happened. I'm interested in Pope Francis. Why does he break through in a way, with all the sex abuse things that we've all been dealing with, and the difficulties we have, the fall off in church attendance? He speaks to people, not just Catholics. He speaks. I have people from the other churches saying, "Oh, we tune into Pope Francis, we listen to," and I think people, atheists and whatever, agnostic, whatever, he's speaking to the real issues of the day in a way which is, he understands it from within because of his past experience, very deep with social engagement, all sorts of different levels. But he's internalized it in a way, he articulates it and responds to it in a very contemporary way. Now, that's the sort of person I think we need in the formal church leadership. I guess it's very hard to find those sort of, with all those skills in one person. But with a group of people, you can combine them. And I think the second big point is that it's no longer just the clergy who need to take the main roles on these things. I suppose it's never been always the clergy. You look at the history of church social teaching. The lay activists have been Dorothy Day. They're talking about canonizing her at the moment. So these are I think we're entering a new era where we're trying to find a way for skilled lay voices, lay leadership to emerge in a new context. I think it's very relevant to the group of people here today, because you're all, everybody here today is very attuned to these matters and in responsible positions. But how do, it's your point, Megan, how do we gather this in a way which has a sort of direction that you're suggesting?
So Bruce, I have thought about that, and here it is. I'm a partner in a private law firm. It's called Colin Biggers and Paisley, and I do X amount of work for Catholic entities each year. But the amount of work that I do for Catholic entities each year, that's paid work, is a drop in the bucket compared to the amount of money that Catholic entities pay at the big end of town, where the PwCs and Deloittes and those sorts of people live. So I think it's time that church collectively got together and said, we need you to give back to us. We've been paying you a fortune for years to do, whether it's over audit or advisory work. We now need something from you, and that's a bit of research. And if you want to keep our accounts, which are massive, we need to actually leverage our power in the way, and I know this will be tastes like salt or ash in your mouth, but church is an enormous business. And it deals with commercial people, and commercial people respond to a couple of things, but one importantly are fees. And if we harness and understand what the amount of fees it is that we are spending at the top end of town, then we should be asking for them for something in return. Similarly, we should be asking them to partner with us to do that really important work, whether it is through connections at universities or whether it's through their own research arms. I mean, you think Deloitte Access Economics does some fantastic work in this space. Why can't we ask them to help us to get this information across? I think the answer is there, it's in our hands. And I don't think it's about pulling together the 50 people on this call today necessarily to empty pockets or to do those sorts of things to make a financial contribution. But it is about finding out where those points of pressure might be and asking for something in return.
If I could, Bruce, on the question of leadership, it seems to me that we do have leaders in the church who will speak out on more narrow doctrinal matters, and I'm thinking of things like concerns about LGBTI suppression legislation or dying with dignity legislation. But when it comes to the well-being of people, the ability of young people to buy houses, the ability of people to bring up their families and support them properly, this goes to the fundamental of a good society. Where are our leaders? Why is it that church leaders don't choose to focus on these matters? I mean, I think it's quite clear the work is done for them, and it's done for them very well. Why aren't there more leaders who are speaking up on this? Why isn't there talk about the Me Too movement, for example? I mean, the people in glass houses, I guess one should say, but that's all the more reason they should be conscious of these issues of the day, and given the sort of Christian leadership that I would have thought we're all about. We give leadership in those areas that seem to be more narrow doctrinally, that I don't know whether they're more comfortable with, but certainly they shouldn't be more comfortable with them. Why do you think we don't have leaders in these more fundamental issues of a good society?
Could I just make a comment about this? I think one of the reasons for the relative lack of contribution on economic related issues is that there's not enough underlying research that informs the bishops and makes the bishops comfortable in speaking on particular matters, because people will say of a bishop, well, what do you know about business? What do you know about the economy? Where is your training, etc. I think what the bishop should be doing, and what all of us should be doing, is ensuring, as Megan has suggested, that we've got the research, we've got the data, we've got the thinking, we've got the policy frameworks for dealing with these matters. And I've just put on the chat a reference to some work that's been done on the needs of low-paid workers and their families, and including in that unemployed workers and their families. This is research that was conducted by the Social Policy Research Centre at the University of New South Wales. It was originally developed in the 1990s as a result of federal government funding, Labor government funding, when Peter Baldwin was the relevant minister, and it languished a bit until the ACTU tried to revive it or update it in 2004 or so. Didn't succeed, even though they'd put it forward to the then Industrial Relations Commission in an annual wage review. But subsequently, Catholic Social Services Australia in particular got together a research project, and the Social Policy Research Centre updated its budget standards, as the term is, on the needs of low-income families. And they came up with that report in 2019 that you can see the reference to. I was involved in doing minimum wage submissions on behalf of the bishops over the period from 2003 to 2018. What we tried to do each year was to throw light on the financial needs of low-income workers and working families. We didn't have the research until the budget standards material came along in its revised form. The Fair Work Commission accepted that it was the best research in Australia on the needs of low-income workers and working families. But they still had a few reservations about it, and they weren't really prepared to follow through its implications. I think it's fair to say that the people who Megan has referred to in Treasury, who came up with the $750 a week, probably looked at that research to get a ballpark figure. In any event, it is critical research. It needs to be updated. Catholic Social Services Australia no longer has the money to update it. And if I was looking for a top priority in research and collaboration of the kind that Megan has discussed, I would hone in on that research, because I think that is the critical piece of data about the needs of low-income families, whether they're in work or out of work, and it can make a big difference to our social advocacy.
Thanks, Brian. I noticed that actually we're just hit the 4 o'clock time, which was our formal time that we said we'd finish. So I don't know, I think that might be the best thing to do. Many people have other commitments on a Saturday. Brian, would you like to say any final closing words? And if people want to hang around for a while, we're quite happy to leave this open for people to have an informal chat, but I think we should kind of come to an end formally so that people can be free to go and do, and we'll hopefully follow up with further events in the future. Brian?
I just want to say that the living wage was canvassed in Rerum Novarum 130 years ago today, May the 15th, 1891 was the date. We knew then what the living wage might be. It was reinforced by the Harvester Judgment in 1907, and yet today we just have not got a living wage. The national minimum wage is not a living wage, and in that sense we've got a lot of progress to make.
Thanks very much, Brian, and thanks also especially to Bruce and to Megan for sharing your expertise and experience. And yeah, I think there's plenty of things to follow up for the future. And we've got your emails now. If you don't mind, we'll keep sending you our details of our future events. And if you also have other things that are going on, very happy to hear what you might have to propose as well. So I'd just like to thank everybody for being here, and I'll call this formally to an end. Amen. But anybody like to chat on or say hello to anybody else, go for it.
Yeah, there are